Today, in the beautiful city of Canberra, where nature and urban life coexist in harmony, I look forward to witnessing yet another round of meaningful discussions on the future of the Indo-Pacific region. We are now facing divisions and confrontations in the international community. We must aim to realize a free and open Indo-Pacific and make this region a place where diverse nations can coexist and prosper under the rule of law. On the other hand, it is becoming more and more important to take actions to address climate change, an urgent challenge shared by all humanity. At the same time, it is important to ensure economic growth in the Indo-Pacific region for the stability and prosperity of the international community. In order to advance these efforts, collaboration with a wide range of partners in the region is essential. For instance, Japan and Australia are firmly enhancing cooperation in the areas of security and defense, as well as economy and energy, under the Special Strategic Partnership. Japan and India have been dramatically strengthening our bilateral relations, especially in the political and security areas under the Special Strategic and Global Partnership. Furthermore, with New Zealand, we have closely and firmly developed our bilateral relations under the Strategic Cooperation Partnership. This has been contributing to regional and international peace and prosperity. Japan has also been increasing efforts through not only bilateral relations, but also multilateral frameworks such as the G20, APEC, CPTPP, WTO, Quad, and IP4. Through these initiatives, we are tackling the geopolitical challenges in the Indo-Pacific region, which is the theme of today's conference. We have focused on economic security agendas as well, such as strengthening supply chain and backbone infrastructure, and enhancement of connectivity, including submarine cables. I reaffirm Japan's commitment to work closely together with the countries of the Indo-Pacific region. As their partner in establishing a better international community, we will strive for the prosperity of the region and the resolution of global issues. The Indo-Pacific region is a stage of challenge where we can build the future together. Let us explore our potential for new cooperation through today's discussions and take the first step toward our future. Thank you for your kind attention.
Thank you so much, and good evening, everyone. And it's an honor to be here. As I mentioned, I'm the president of the East-West Center in Honolulu, Hawaii. It was established by the U.S. Congress in 1960 to promote relations and understanding among people and nations of the United States, Asia, and the Pacific. So it's wonderful to be here to moderate this panel on the blue opportunity. Building on the comments that were made earlier, the Indo-Pacific partnerships in terms of infrastructure, growth, and development are something that our distinguished panelists will address today. And we do have a limited amount of time, so I'm very excited to hear them share a little bit about this topic. But I first want to just quickly set the stage. We've heard from our distinguished leaders who came before me that the nations of the Indo-Pacific definitely are at an inflection point today. And there is a sense of urgency. We hear a lot of talk, we have a lot of dialogues, but there's a certain sense of urgency. People want to know what this means for them today and tomorrow. There are multiple challenges that all of our nations face in the Indo-Pacific, from environmental degradation to economic security and slowing growth. So really, to realize that vibrant future and the growth for a blue economy, there has to be a clear way forward for resilient physical as well as virtual digital infrastructure that also needs to have a plan for financing and how we build it. How do we make it a reality? How do we build resilient communities that are resilient against those shifts and shocks that we see so much in this region? And there needs to be plans for reforming financial systems, as well as updating them, making them greener, as well as a need for effective governance at a time when good governance is challenged, that recognizes that need for inclusivity, justice, including gender equity. So our distinguished panelists today are going to share a little bit on the new models of cooperation, from undersea cables to digital infrastructure, that can create the new 21st century growth paradigm. And I was going to introduce them all, but given our limited time, you've heard you can check out their bios online. But first, I'd like to share some of the driving questions that we've asked them to share with us today. Are there successful models for triangular or mini-lateral infrastructure creation in the Indo-Pacific that can be replicated, that we can all in here learn from? And how can we build out platforms and policies that ensure the benefits of the digital economy are there for all? Not just for a select few, but for all. And what do resilient coasts and island communities look like? How can the nations of the Indo-Pacific collaborate on new, vibrant blue economy paradigms that put people first? Again, a lot of discussion, but what are the tangibles and the outcomes? So I wanted to start first with the Secretary General, Indra Mani Pandey, who's the Secretary General of the Bay and Bengal Initiative for Multi-Sectoral Technical and Economic Cooperation, or BIMSTEC, a seasoned diplomat whose extensive career includes serving all around the world with years of incredible experience. So I'd like to ask you, Secretary General, maybe if you could share a little bit about BIMSTEC and share with us some of your thoughts about the blue opportunities.
Yeah. Thank you so much for giving me this opportunity. BIMSTEC as a regional organization was founded in 1997, 27 years ago. The need was felt to have a regional organization which can focus on economic and technical cooperation. Over these 27 years, it has grown. Today, it has a vast agenda of 15 sectors, which includes from blue economy to connectivity to health to agriculture and food security, a vast range of sector, trade and investment, development, human resource development. Also, the BIMSTEC today has institutional mechanisms, both core mechanisms involving all the member states in their decision-making processes, and also sectoral mechanisms, so ministerial mechanisms for different sectors, senior officers mechanism. And the habit of cooperation among the 7 member states has been growing, although it is believed that we have not been able to achieve the potential that we should have. But we are in the process of addressing some of the shortcomings in the institution, and we hope to be able to address those shortcomings. The BIMSTEC brings together 7 countries, 5 from South Asia and 2 from Southeast Asia, Myanmar and Thailand. Thus, it acts as a bridge between the 2 parts of Asia. Now, when we look at Indo-Pacific, what we realize is that Indo-Pacific is very diverse. So when we are looking for opportunities, we are looking for solutions for the challenges that we face, I think we need to have specific strategies for different regions. Now that is where the BIMSTEC can play a role, because Bay of Bengal is a very important sub-region of Indian Ocean. And if we have to devise strategies for the Bay of Bengal and countries around it, including India, I think BIMSTEC will be able to provide that platform where the players in the region and beyond can come and work with us, and we would be able to coordinate with our member states. So some of the challenges that you had mentioned and opportunities. So connectivity is very important for us. We have a master plan for surface connectivity. The agreement for maritime transport cooperation has been negotiated, and it is likely to be signed at the next summit. We are looking at digital connectivity aspects, and also in future we are looking for opportunities to have financial connectivity too among our member states. We have people-to-people connectivity aspects also on our agenda. So culture, tourism, bringing think tanks together from the region. And we are looking now to create a platform for our parliamentarians. Youth engagement is on the agenda through sports and youth conclaves. Blue economy, as I mentioned, is also on our agenda. We have created an expert group. This is a sector where Bangladesh is playing the leading role. Another aspect of development in our region is enhancing trade, because once we have more trade and more investment, it leads to more growth and development. There too, we have been in the process of negotiating FTAs for our region, and we hope to make some quick progress in the coming years. Since there are a number of regional organizations in Indo-Pacific, I represent BIMSTEC, but there is also ASEAN, a well-known organization. In the Pacific, you have Pacific Islands Forum. Also in the Western Indian Ocean, you have Indian Ocean Rim Association, bringing countries from that region together. What I would like to propose that we need to have a platform where all these regional organizations can come together, where we share our best practices, where we talk about our experiences, and try to avoid duplication in our efforts, because there is also overlap in the memberships, at least between ASEAN, BIMSTEC, and IORA. So we are working for the same set of members, and if we come together, talk about what we can do more in different sectors, given there are synergies in our agenda too, I think we'll be able to realize some of the broad goals for Indo-Pacific, whether we are looking at security, whether we are looking at sustainable development, whether we are looking at models for dealing with the changes that are taking place due to global warming. And again, Bay of Bengal is a region which is gravely affected by these climate change challenges. And we have a sector called Environment and Climate Change, which is led by Bhutan, and Honorable Minister is here. So there the focus is more on how to deal with challenges. We have a separate sector called disaster management. So we are looking at countries pooling their resources to deal with the disasters in the region. So what I would like to say in my conclusion, that BIMSTEC is a very vibrant organization, and it can be a partner for the countries in the region, for the organizations in the region, when they are looking at opportunities for working together with the 7 member states in Bay of Bengal.
Thank you, Secretary General. I appreciate that. Do you find, before we move on, it sounds like this is a comprehensive look that some people can look to. Do you find there's a revitalization in what BIMSTEC is doing? I mean, it's very comprehensive when you describe the role that it plays, this bridge between Southeast Asia and South Asia, and culture, connectivity, maritime security, the whole of society look. is there a revitalization of BIMSTEC? Do you find more involvement, more tangible outcomes in your working groups?
What I have noticed through my interaction with the leaders of the member states, that there is a huge political commitment to make BIMSTEC work, because they see in BIMSTEC an organization which can actually deliver on the ground. There are some institutional issues which an eminent persons group was set up. They have made their recommendations, which are being considered by the member states. I'm quite hopeful that once we have those recommendations implemented, BIMSTEC would have a much better future in terms of delivering the promises to the member states and the people. With our vast agenda, institutional mechanism in place, our charter in place, we are poised to play our role. Also, I would like to say that BIMSTEC is now open to observers and partners, both institutional partners and countries, and we are looking forward to working together with other countries too.
Well, thank you. Thank you so much, Secretary General. Now we're going to move on to the Honorable Lord Whakawhanua, who's Speaker of the Parliament of the Kingdom of Tonga. And Lord Whakawhanua, you've been really a strong advocate for a lot of political reforms and even women participation in politics, youth representation. You know, your leadership has really been instrumental in addressing key issues of all kinds, not just of Tonga, but the region. So would love for you to share on some of these, any one of these topics that we just discussed on Blue Opportunities.
I have 5 minutes on
you
all three
5
questions.
Minutes and, you know.
Well, I just want to acknowledge the organizers and thank Raisina Dialogue for inviting me. Raisina Down Under, sorry. I just want to state that from our experience in the Pacific, we are far too small to have any influence in what's happening. We're not one of the 3 big continental power players, and so we're very much observers, but we're increasingly finding ourselves under a lot of scrutiny, and we're getting a lot of attention. And as you're aware, Tonga recently hosted the Pacific Island Forum, and it was the biggest, most attended forum ever, which is evident of the moving times. Jaishankar talked about how now it's not a simple, you can't describe countries as being, you're either on that side or on that side. There's a lot of cross-pollination happening. And in terms of new ways of engagement, I'll give you an example of what the Pacific is doing right now. We are in the midst of organizing a parliamentary grouping which doesn't exist. There is no Pan-Pacific parliamentary group. And right now we're in the midst of organizing what is called the Pacific Island Parliamentary Group, and it will be the first. And because of that, it has attracted a lot of attention. To give you an idea of some of the Indo-Pacific new partners that are emerging, I would give you Indonesia recently hosted a speakers conference for all the Pacific Islands. And their ambition is for the Pacific to use Indonesia as the gateway to ASEAN. So there is potential there for South-South cooperation. We can go further into Asia in terms of our relationship with India, which is strengthening right now. But for Tonga in particular, we are very much integrated into the West. And I think now is an interesting time because we're finding ourselves talking with non-traditional partners. And I think these new alliances can only strengthen cooperation in terms of our ambition as the Pacific. I think you're aware of the 2050 Blue Pacific Strategy, and that is the ambition of all Pacific Island nations to empower ourselves, to protect our environment, and to be a blue continent. For that to happen, we need partners, we need technology, we need funding. And for that, we need to talk to everyone. We can't exclude anyone. And with Tonga, we have foreign policy of friend to all and enemy to no one. So we can talk to the likes of Iran, we can talk to the likes of Russia, we can talk to the likes of, to anyone, really. So similar to Japan, to India's non-aligned policy, for us, it is a matter of respecting an international rules-based order that we enjoy as a sovereign country. And so we would like to encourage a peaceful world and condemn, those who want to take advantage of that. So bringing it back to how that benefits us in terms of the Blue Pacific, we want climate action, and we're becoming slightly disillusioned right now because the 2030 is not happening as fast as we want. And unfortunately, we are at the forefront of natural disasters that are not our own. And Secretary Antonio Guterres has spoken about climate injustice and how we are at the forefront. Islands are not going to exist in our lifetime. That is existential. It is a fact. And so for those who are denying it, there is a lack of empathy. There's a lack of respect for humanity. And for those who think that, they can just move, that's highly disrespectful to uproot countries. And so I think it's important that we bring empathy back into these conversations, into minilateral agreements, into multilateral agreements, into foreign policy. I dread the day where we're going to see this happening, and it's only a matter of time. Questions over sovereignty. Some countries have pledged their support for sovereignty for some of the Pacific Island countries that would lose their sovereignty would lose almost their statehood, because there will be no more islands for them to exist on. What will happen to those populations when you move them into, say, Fiji or Australia? So when we talk about the importance of green and blue infrastructure, to what end? When you have a population who has been moved away from their traditional country, what happens to their democracy? Do they hold elections? Would they hold their foreign passport on a foreign land? What sort of rights do they have over their minerals? What about their undersea mineral seabed rights and their fisheries and their industries and all of that? These are unanswered questions that obviously we don't have answers to, but are a result of our climate inaction. And that to us is our number one security issue. So I think maybe I've reached my 5 minutes.
Well, thank you so much for your comments, and thank you for a wonderful hosting of the Pacific Island Forum. It was inspiring, and I appreciate, Lord, your humility, but Tonga is an example of moving forward the 2050 strategy, and even the example of the volcanic eruption and the resiliency of the community in its response to that tsunami and volcanic eruption, with very few casualties given the severity of that event. And I think Tonga remains that example.
We had great partners. There was a resounding, not resounding, there was a big response. It looked like a war zone with all of the fleet of ships that arrived in Tonga, but there was a lot of support for the humanitarian aid that was required. And we're very thankful that we have partners and those who have the humanitarian aid and disaster response capacity to mobilize. And Australia and New Zealand particularly have pre-positioned their HADAR assets for the Pacific because of this climate vulnerability. And it's only going to get worse, and we need to strengthen our infrastructures. We need seawalls, we need evacuation centers, We need to be pragmatic, we need to move populations away from vulnerable zones. And on that point, we are rebuilding our Parliament building on higher ground with the assistance of the Australian-New Zealand government as a result of what is happening in the changing climate.
Thank you. Thank you for adding those points. So moving on right now to Mr. Magnus Everbring, who is the Chief Technology Officer for the Asia-Pacific Ericsson. So shifting to technology, he's worked many, many years on technology strategies for Ericsson in the Asia-Pacific, and really over 30 years of executive positions in research and development. So would love to get your insights, as we've talked about structures, the Pacific, and the question on technology, platforms, policies, or how do we create more resilient communities?
Thank you, and great pleasure to be here at this summit. I think there are a number of views here on how public sector and private sector can collaborate within a country and between nations. And representing then, or being a representative of the mobile communications industry, of course I'd like to focus on how the fifth generation 5G can help and enable drive change in society. And it can in many ways. In the past, we've had mobile systems geared towards consumers. Now we're moving into serving enterprises, industries, manufacturing, etc., government agencies, peacekeeping, defense even. And that will require new requirements on the mobile operators. New kinds of devices will come about and new potentials. We see it coming. It's a big change, step by step, it's coming along. And in all of this, there is a balance between how does this society regulate, have policies, what is possible to do to stimulate private investments. A few examples, and it's a great pleasure then to start here in Australia. For the last few decades, Australia has been very quick on adapting the latest mobile technology. Australians today have some of the best networks. They know that whenever you're out and about, you're being reachable. And that puts demands on the mobile operators. And I also say the regulatory framework is there to support it. Now is an era then when we go into allowing enterprises to use it and industries. Mining industry here in Australia is quickly adopting it. And we see use cases where staff is improving efficiency, quality, what they do, sitting above ground in office environment, driving gigantic dumpers and front loaders, etc. That is okay to do, right, from a technology point of view, in a sealed-off environment in the boondocks. And we can do that, and that's being done here in Australia. But does your nation allow that to happen on a public road? Not perhaps to drive a big dumper, but at least drive a vehicle on a public road. We're collaborating with companies in Germany, in Sweden, who do cars and trucks which are partly autonomous, partially assisted by people sitting in office environments. It's a case where you can think of, are you embracing and enabling the new technology potential? If not, you put your nation at a disadvantage, I would argue. Innovation will be where it's possible. Moving eastwards, I'd like to highlight Singapore. Very early, the Singaporean government gave out the conditions for running 5G for the local operators. They demanded for the operators to go into full-blown 5G with all of its support from the very start. Few operators have done that, and few nations have had the foresight to stipulate that. It's not surprising to me if you ask me to highlight a leading operator that uses this absolutely most potential of 5G. It's a leading operator in Singapore. They are one of a handful examples that I would list. And that again has been stimulated by the public sector, allowing for the private sector to invest. Last example, let's go to India. And just as a reflection there, it's privileged for me to be in the Indo-Pacific region. There are many good examples here that stand out in the world. India has, in the last 2 years, with 2 private operators, deployed over 455,000 radio base stations, antenna towers that you see along the highways. That's a staggering amount. And that's private investment. All major cities in India are fully covered, and they offer services which are unprecedented. The innovation game is now running in India, how to leverage this for the consumer sector, enterprises, etc. And as one example, Prime Minister Modi a year ago granted 100 universities to have their own 5G system to drive innovation on top of it. Give it a year or two, and I'm sure we'll see many new applications coming out of that force. So there are many cases here where 5G will drive big changes in society, improving safety for workers, improving efficiency, improving quality, and helping new innovations in industry come about. Last example, a university hospital in Singapore now use a 5G system to transmit the signals to the surgeon who has XR goggles. They have a digital twin, a scanned version of the patient, and as they perform the surgery, they overlay an image with the XR device, and thereby can do a more precise surgery on the patient. That is cutting-edge technology being deployed in the field by a nation that has the right infrastructure in place. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Everbring, for that. You know, you've really brought to examples Australia, Singapore, India, and the regulatory frameworks, the infrastructure that exists, and implying also the STEM education pipeline that allows for that, and the resources to be able to do that. And not everyone has that, but your advice on, you're giving the example of how do we make that available, the excellent healthcare that exists because you've leveraged technology. What advice would you give? I mean, as you've given these examples for those who may not have. We heard from the Lord that sometimes, not all of these smaller island states have that kind of technologies and infrastructure available to them.
Key thing here is that the innovation process is ongoing now, and anyone can get in and be active. But if you prefer to stay and not move now and wait a few years, then you'll be behind. Now's the time to move. The technology is there, now it needs to be applied. The mining industry is there, they've started. Given 5 years, they will be a lot more advanced. The mining companies that do not start now will be late. So get into it, use international collaboration, and start to use it.
Thank you so much, Mr. Everbring. Now moving on to the Honorable Secretary Leslie Kotovavala, the Permanent Secretary for the Foreign Affairs for the Republic of Fiji. Dr. Leslie Kotovavala, has definitely emphasized in many articles that I've read, Mr. Secretary, about the need for collective action in addressing climate-induced human migration, all of these amongst many issues that you've discussed. And we've heard a little bit about the infrastructure or the structures. We've heard about the policies that need to take advantage of the technology and innovation, and what resilient communities look like in the blue economy. And I wondered, from your perspective, where you sit in the Republic of Fiji and the work that you do, if you could share with us.
Thank you. Let me start by saying that in talking about Fiji and the Pacific, with our Pacific family, we use the rule of proportionality. And clearly, what are small issues for bigger country are big deals for small islands. In our recently published foreign policy white paper, Fiji recognized that the Indo-Pacific region is its strategic priority, that it needs to see the Indo-Pacific as a region of peace and prosperity. But decoding that into the Pacific area and to Fiji specifically, I will piggyback on the comments from my Kainga from Tonga. I add on slightly to the third point about the questions underpinning this session about what does coastal infrastructure look like. May I add, how does it feel to be in that space and in that coastal infrastructures? For Fiji has a population of less than 1 million. And there are other small islands or atolls that are much less. And here we are talking about coastal infrastructure. For some of them, they have no other inland infrastructure. That's it. So when we talk about coastal infrastructures, we are talking about exposure, we're talking about the elements, we're talking about rise sea level, we're talking about annual cyclones. And these are the pressures that are put on infrastructure and local economies. We see our leaders in the Pacific, in response to this, they promulgated what we heard before is a 2050 strategy for the Blue Pacific continent. But the emphasis of the continent is also implying that there is an identity there. And then we ask our question ourselves is, while we're pursuing development, what are the price that small islands pay in order to reach a level of development? The words of renowned sociologist Samuel Huntington rings true, that it is true that economic development replaces and changes culture. But that truth does not help us if the purpose of development is to remove those cultures to economic development. And for the Pacific people, culture is paramount. And for us, in looking at development, we need to strike a balance between how much we do and how much we preserve in the same process. Our Prime Minister is on record with the leader's endorsement that he wants to see the Pacific as an ocean of peace. And the principal one to that concept is the Pacific Way. The identity of the Pacific people and the role that they play in the Pacific and the bigger scheme of things in the Indo-Pacific. It also demands for certain level of conduct and behavior in the Pacific. And you would probably recall on the 25th of the last month, there was a firing of an ICBM in the Pacific. The fact that no Pacific Island nation was notified sends us a different message altogether. That the Pacific nations do not matter. That the Pacific Ocean is seen as empty. And when the missile was fired into the Pacific, we got the message from our neighbors, Australia and New Zealand. But that message runs deep in us. So we would like to see that even though we're small, but we see development, that we have a role in development in the Pacific region for greater good, that we have to play our part in that space. Taking it out to the national level, we see that the majority of our people still live in rural areas. We heard about connectivity. There is absolutely a crucial need for those. But for Fiji in particular, we see Fiji's transit role in the Pacific as a transit point for other Pacific Islanders. So the infrastructure that is developed in Fiji is seen to facilitate the movement, the economic activities, the relationship between the Pacific and its neighbors beyond the region. A large proportion of the population still live in hardship. So all the technology we're talking about at the local level, at the community level, is beyond their reach. So our development needs to come down to the ground level so that we can lift up to the level where they can link in to the technological innovations that we realize today. Those are some basic things that community work in the Pacific Islands need to live with for now as we try to link up into the greater Indo-Pacific family. But we look to the Indo-Pacific. This is a region of ideas, tested projects, tested solutions. We look to our neighbors in the Indo-Pacific region as we live in a contested region between the major powers. The question that we ask ourselves is, what if one day these major powers come to a peaceful conclusion? And if we are forced to take sides, what happens to us when that comes? We need to look at contingencies. We hear the foreign minister of India talking about we need to create options for us. We always have to have options. And these are the options that we have to look at. We cannot afford to be handcuffed to a particular solution because we are developing a relationship with a particular partner or a group of partners. But in the development of our infrastructure and our coastal economies, we also look at ourselves as ocean people. In the Chogam in Samoa last week, there was celebration of the declaration of the ocean policy by the Commonwealth. But in the midst that celebration, Tuvalu stood up and said, while we celebrate the success of this declaration, it nails down the demise of Tuvalu as a people and as a country. Then in 26 years' time, 50% of Tuvalu will be underwater. 25 years from then on, no less than 90% underwater. So we are talking in our lifetime, we're already talking and planning of people that we are trying to look after in our time, that we are now seeing the end of their journey. We have already received a request for relocation. We are working with that particular country now on the mechanisms for that. So we're looking into land allocation, we're looking into livelihood, we're looking into access to services, support. So while we are talking about development, we are talking about not only us, but how we as a nation, as a Pacific Island country, facilitate for the livelihood of other people that we live together. I thank the organizers for this meeting, that here we are able to voice the little voice from the Pacific Islands, but also to hear tested solutions in your regions, in your countries, what we can learn from and adapt, while we want to play our part in this bigger family in the Pacific. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. Thank you so much. Yes, very moving. Thank you for reminding us about the fact that the Pacific, just as the Lord said, is on the front lines of climate change, with adaptation at the forefront today, not tomorrow. And I do appreciate, you mentioned something about the proportionality between technology and culture and development, all of those mixed together. And I wondered, we saw the Festival of Pacific Arts and Culture come to Honolulu. We saw this unity. We saw the Pacific Island Forum when I first went in Fiji, when it was there, and then in Tonga, this regional architecture of bringing the voice together of the entire Blue Pacific. But also this revival of indigenous knowledge combined with that technology. I wondered if you could just speak to that, because you touched on that. How do you not lose that, but we could learn so much from our ancestors and the large ocean states?
In our preparation for the first time Fiji has come out publicly in its foreign policy white paper, and under the usual 3 pillars of sovereignty, we discussed at length about identity. And we consulted widely, not only amongst the Fijians, but other Pacific Islanders living in Fiji, academics, business people, our development partners. What does it mean for us? And one thing that came out clear from the consultation is our values and our interests come from our identity. If that is clear, those two are clear. when we talk about multi-ethnicity in the Pacific, it implies that the original ethnic base is firm, is alive, and is thriving. Because it's that level that feeds the multi-ethnic level. Without that original level, there's something else that we cannot identify with that exists at the multi-ethnic level of interactions. It's something that we have discussed at length, and we want to make sure that all the groups in the country and beyond are familiar with this. We have restated the Great Council of Chiefs. We have modified or repurposed it to our modern needs. We watch our neighbors, Tonga and Samoa, Palau and others, how they're also evolving. But we see that it is in democracy that we can evolve this culture. It is under the rule of law that we are able to safeguard this. And these are the fundamentals in the way that we also need to build our economy and let the people be free to be able to identify or rediscover themselves as we evolve in these modern times, with technology especially, that's defining the way that we interact. But in all this, one thing that we come out clear is relationship is the key, within and between, within the country and beyond Fiji, and beyond the Pacific. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. And I think that along the lines of the relationships are the Pacific way, as you mentioned. Yes. So thank you for that. I'd like to now shift to Ms. Haley Channer, who is the Director of Economic Security Program with the United States Study Center at the University of Sydney, Australia. And she, of course, brings an interdisciplinary lens to her analysis, having worked as an Australian government official, ministerial advisor, think tank analyst, and represented global nonprofit organizations. So I'd love to get your perspectives, Haley.
Thank you, Susie, and I'm so delighted to be here and to be able to be on this distinguished panel. I do work at the United States Studies Center, and we are on election eve, so maybe I'll very quickly address that because of the implications for the entire Indo-Pacific region. All I wanted to say is that I can say with great certainty that the next president of the United States will be Kamala Harris or Donald Trump. And I think there are positive takeaways no matter who becomes president. Positive because if Trump becomes president, I think that every country in the Indo-Pacific will look at each other with a new sense of admiration and will want to work more deeply and broadly, and I think that can only be a good thing. And good news if Kamala Harris wins, because I think that she will bring stability and predictability, and certain regional frameworks, minilaterals and other regional frameworks like the Indo-Pacific Economic Framework will survive. So there's good news all around. The panel tonight has talked about so many wide-ranging issues, from minilaterals like BIMSTEC to perspectives from Tonga and Fiji, and also the private sector. And this panel is about infrastructure in the Indo-Pacific region. It's a topic we've been talking about for many years, particularly since China launched its Belt and Road Initiative and started building all over the world. And I think that each of the members of the panel are all representing a different part of the solution to this infrastructure challenge. So we all know how much infrastructure will cost. It's billions upon billions of dollars. Earlier this year, our Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade estimated about $400 billion in energy and transport infrastructure alone in the South Asia region is required every year. So $400 billion each year adds up to $1 trillion pretty quickly. And there is absolutely no way that the World Bank, Australia, India, Japan, the United States and China can do that together. We desperately need Ericsson and the private sector to help us with that challenge. So I just want to make two main points in my comments. Basically, I will focus on government cooperation and how we can actually push this agenda forward, because from my perspective, I'm very impatient. And it takes a very long time to build infrastructure, decades in fact. So for me, I've been looking at this issue for about 4 years, and not a lot has happened, except China has built a lot. So I'm keen to see other countries offer alternative infrastructure offerings that are better for the climate, better for local communities, and better in quality, so that they last longer and that they're fit for purpose, but also so that the communities that that infrastructure goes into has a longer term benefit. So the 2 points I want to make. We all talk about cooperation. We need to stop talking about cooperation. The reason I say that is because we need to coordinate and deconflict individual efforts, and by individual I mean bilateral, a donor country and a recipient country, rather than doing infrastructure together. Because anyone who knows anything about infrastructure knows that it is extremely hard to build infrastructure. If you live in Sydney or Melbourne, you know that the Sydney Metro and the Westgate Tunnel in Melbourne are nightmares, and that the NBN rollout, it's plagued with problems. That's just domestically. If you think about in the region, it is very difficult to deliver infrastructure in a group. Australia has found this in Papua New Guinea, where we work with the United States, Japan, and New Zealand to try and electrify Papua New Guinea. That program has been fraught with problems for its own reasons, but one of the problems is coordination. It is so complex to coordinate with those 4 countries plus Papua New Guinea to deliver that program. But on top of that, just look at one country, the United States. There are 7 departments in the United States responsible for infrastructure. And even in that case, it's very difficult to coordinate. So what I'm saying is that we should do things independently, but deconflict, and I think we will build infrastructure faster. The second point I want to make is that the key to all of this is the private sector. I made the point before that we can't afford to do this alone. DFAT estimates $400 billion every year. Australia also has, and I'll focus a bit on South Asia rather than the Pacific because we have talked about the Pacific, but Australia has a South Asia Regional Infrastructure Connectivity, SAREC program, and it was a 4-year program. It was only $32 million, and that's no poor reflection on Australia for not funding it enough. It's just that we have a lot of things to fund. But we need the private sector desperately, and to just give you another figure, from 2000 to 2020, the private sector globally was responsible for $97 billion worth of investment every year in 2021 figures. So if we are not attracting the private sector and making infrastructure projects enticing for them, we will never meet this demand. And I've also brought a bit of show and tell, and that is a new report that our institute has put out by Ria Sinha from the Centre for Social and Economic Progress in New Delhi. Her report's called Building Bridges. It's going to be available very soon. But one of the issues she talks about is not only the need for that private sector investment, but also just the need to know one another. So her first recommendation is bridging knowledge gaps between Australia and India, because we just don't know our capabilities and capacities. So we might think that the first hurdle that we all get over is deciding to cooperate. That's the easy part. The next bit is actually understanding what each partner has to offer and what their private sectors have to offer. Because if individual governments in India, or in the Quad Nations, for example, India, US, Japan, Australia, if we are not attracting the private sector, we're never going to meet the need. And sort of the last point I will say is that the way you attract the private sector isn't just through subsidies and handouts. The private sector wants to know that the government is an equal share partner and in it for the long term. Because if you take one type of infrastructure, undersea cables and telecommunications, it takes decades to lay those undersea cables, and in the past, it was the purview of governments to do that. Now it's the large companies like Amazon and Meta and Google who are actually laying these undersea cables. And governments need to work more with the private sector than they ever have before. So we need to work smarter by actually having governments co-invest for equal partnerships over the duration of the infrastructure asset. And until we have governments taking more risk and being willing to lose more public money, we will not see the infrastructure built in time. And in the meantime, other countries are building that infrastructure.
Thank you so much for those insights, and well said. I like your comment about coordination versus cooperation. And you talked about the private sector, public sector cooperation and coordination, and this incentivizing outside of just giving subsidies. I wondered if you could, you talked about these knowledge gaps. So, we talk about cooperation, but how do we do it? If it's, how do we do that?
I think this is a good question for Magnus, someone from the private sector.
Yeah.
But I would just say in passing that until government departments in each country start thinking like their private sectors and actually trusting those partnerships that the private sector is just looking for a handout, and that actually government needs the private sector more than the private sector needs us, when you have more of a mutual understanding, trust and respect, I think it will move faster.
Did you want to? Yes.
Yeah. Repeat, please.
The question was, how do we incentivize the private sector outside of just subsidies to do this kind of partnership that she's talking about of coordination of investing, let's say, undersea cables, the private sector does the security, or will I help you to make sure that it's secure on each end on the...
I don't think there's a simple answer on that. I mean, I argue you want to stimulate private investments, you want to get them to take the bait, so to say. And I think it's stronger if they feel the win for it. If it's a share subsidy, you may push somebody into a corner where they shouldn't be, right? They should step into it based on the merits they feel. I'm just... one area that for the mobile industry is very central, where they interact with the government side, is licensing of radio spectrum. How do you price that in the best way? I think we can have a long discussion here on how many governments have tried to do it, and in hindsight, it's had some kind of side effect. Right? And it is a very tricky question. But I think, without any specific examples, but there are many cases where the entry cost has been too much, and that's been then depriving the investment to actually build the coverage. I would argue if it's too cheap, if I can put it that way, then there will be a debate about a few being privileged and others are not, and it's taxpayers' money. So it's a very tricky question. I think it's hard to have a one answer for it, but I think the principle I would like to hold high is that the public or the private sector will invest a lot if I can see their business incentives for it. And long term, that's the strongest solution, I think. So it's set up a climate for that from the public side. Exactly how it depends on what it is.
Each one is unique, and but I think the continuing conversation of how we do that, I think, is something that needs to be integrated into how we approach these issues.
And roads are typically funded by public means, right? It's a very long-term investment, and I think it has a very good effect on society. So there it works very well. Some cases, maybe that's not the paradigm.
Well, thank you for that. I want to transition. We've got a few minutes for some questions from the audience. If you could, we have a few mics going around, and if you have a question, please raise your hand, your name, your organization, and who you'd like to direct the question to, since we have a robust panel here. Oh, here we go. And if you could just keep your question to a question, since we're short on time.
Hi, Tushar Joshi from Australia India Institute. My question is to Mr. Koravavla. We have talked about infrastructure, whether it be digital, physical, or virtual. Infrastructure comes with a cost, and cost is there with interest. And island nations have often been cautious when big players of the region, big countries, when I say big, I mean, in terms of their size. When they come to the countries, they are cautious of their actions, their intentions. What do you, as island nation, see when you seek investment? I mean, what are the do's and don'ts that you would like to suggest to those bigger nations? in terms of when they come to invest in your countries? Thank you.
Thank you. I heard from my colleague on my right mentioning Papua New Guinea. In the Pacific Islands, most of the resources, the land, are owned communally. That's a starting point. So the earlier the government coordinates and secure the endorsement, the support of the communal owners, that's a key starting point. We've had some tricky situations in a number of occasions. When I referred generally to the earlier part about the infrastructure and coastal communities, this was something that was in mind. On the do's and don'ts, I ask probably for those that want to invest in those areas is a clear communication about the intent, the scope of work, what is the role of the land-owning units, and what are the take-home for them. Sometimes their intentions or their needs are lost in translation, including government. Even though I work for government, I recognize that these are some of the pitfalls in the communication between them. Secondly, we need to identify clearly who is the owner of that particular portion of land on which the infrastructure is built. Or if it's a pipeline, the different segments where the pipeline will be constructed. This has to be clearly identified. There has been occasions where proxy owners have claimed ownership, and that has led government to pay huge sums of compensation later on. To me, if there is clear communication up front, the identity of the owners are clear, then you are on a solid footing going forward. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for the question. Thank you, Secretary General. Question in the back there.
Thanks very much. Dr. Amanda Watson from Australian National University. My question is for Lord Whakawhanua or Permanent Secretary Korovavala. I was just wondering, you both highlighted the significant impacts of climate change and rising sea level on coastal infrastructure, which made me think about cable landing stations. So I just wondered, I hadn't quite thought about the vulnerability of the undersea cable landing stations in that way. So I just wondered if that's been part of your discussions or if either of you have any thoughts on that. Thanks.
Lord?
Yeah. Thank you. That's actually a very good question. Right now, Tonga is in the middle of constructing, we have in the pipeline a secondary cable to add resiliency to our connectivity. And we saw our internet cut 3 times within about 3 or 4 years. Most recent was during the volcanic eruption, where over 70 kilometers of our undersea cable was completely destroyed. The domestic cable was recently broken after it was fixed. I think it was online for about 6 months, and then an earthquake during the forum broke it again. And so we have this trilateral arrangement between Tonga, New Zealand, Australia to build a secondary cable that lands in Vava'u, which is in the Northern Islands. It will be connected to the Hawaii cable, and it's being constructed by Subcom. That cable will add resiliency to our connectivity so that if the main cable that we have to the Southern Cross breaks again due to some unforeseen circumstances, at least we'll still have a backup cable in the Northern Islands. The landing station, the route of the cable, the survey was just completed last Thursday. And that survey takes into considerations vulnerabilities due to the hot undersea tectonic movements and all of that. So that survey is informed by the rise in sea level. So that infrastructure, like the new infrastructure of our new parliament, is considered we've considered the rising sea level in its constructions.
Thank you, Lord Whakafanua. And I don't know, Secretary Korovavala, would you like to add anything? No? Okay.
I think it has covered it well.
Well, thank you for those questions, and I apologize, but the good news is that after this, we have a mixer. So if you had questions, you will have access to an amazing panel right here to be able to ask questions to. I really want to thank all of our distinguished panelists, because I think this is a beginning of a continued conversation of infrastructure investment, certain architectures that exist that we can leverage to create connectivity, looking at cooperation rather than just cooperating, but actually coordinating and deconflicting and finding the resources, private-public partnership. I think we've heard a full range and just a little bit to tickle our appetite for more conversation in the next phase, which is our reception. So thank you all. Please join me in giving a round of applause to our panelists.